Yes. Ladies and gentlemen, hobos and tramps, cross-eyed mosquitoes. Come before you, stand behind your speak. Okay, I'm delighted that we were able to entertain this, and if I could just give some background to it. Just a second, because there's so many windows I have to find here. Okay, our current site alteration bylaw was crafted in 2014. In 2020, we attempted to revise it, and there was a redlined version of it that was brought forward. There was a resolution from the Planning Advisory Committee to Council to have staff revisit the site alteration bylaw and come forward with appropriate changes. The purpose of the bylaw that we passed on the 5th was that we learned from our Director of Planning that the site alteration bylaw was not particularly high on his agenda, and the Planning Advisory Committee felt that given that it was crafted in 2014, attempted to be revised in 2020, and here we are 2024 and nothing's been done, that we would like Council to consider raising the priority of that for the Planning Department. That is, there's no need to discuss the details of it. It's just a matter of, do we want to ask, from the Planning Advisory Committee, we asked Council to ask the Planning Department to raise the visibility and priority of this. I'll pause.
Councillor Jarvis.
So to our Director of Planning then, and I tend to agree, I think we should be certainly updating it. At what cost to current planning, current planning agenda, or where would this fit in, and how would it fit in, and how would we accommodate it? Or how can we accommodate it?
Through the mayor, and I think that's, let me turn my camera on. Sorry. There we go. I think that minus this item, I think that formed the discussion at the last planning council in terms of the work plan and priorities. So I'm hearing this is not a new priority, but it was an old priority that wasn't addressed. So you know, if we could put this in a number 2, that'd be my preference, as opposed to we have multiple number 1s at play right now. And I'm hearing this is important one as well. I hate to put it at number 1 because quite frankly, my number 1 right now is to get wheels rolling on the official plan and zoning bylaw review. Not to say that planning staff aren't capable of walking and chewing gum at the same time, but if we could put this let's see, also in context to, I think, another topic of discussion that will be coming up at Planning Advisory Committee further, and that's the floating accommodation bylaw, which would augment the great work that the mayor's been doing on the with other levels of government. So where that fits in context to that one would be helpful knowing as well.
Okay, I appreciate that. Thank you. Is that, I mean, does that work for us? I mean, it's a general question, rhetorical perhaps.
Well, I mean, there were 3 resolutions by the Planning Advisory Committee. We're now discussing the first one. Eventually, we may come up with a motion that says that we're going to resolve that we accept these 3 or not. So we have to go one by one. Okay. And so I'm going to go to Councillor Predko at this point.
So I guess really similar along the lines of inquiry as Councillor Jarvis. It's really and taking this and the next item. I know we're doing these individually, but these are 2 items coming from committee that will have an impact onto the 2024 work plan for the planning department. It really is how resilient is the department and the staff to have these things come a third of the way or quarter of the way, third of the way of the year through to sort of be added to the list. And I'll just ask the Director of Planning to comment further.
Thank you. And through the mayor, and sort of going back to the planning activities for the planners department, they're able to keep us on track and current planning applications that we should be going. So when it comes to these other items that you just mentioned, that usually falls on the drawing upon resources that have that. So there isn't a whole lot of resiliency, but I'm just looking at the plan right now. The site alteration bylaw was already identified as among 4, 5 number 2 items, ranked number 2. Ahead of that are some number 1 items. So we'll see if the ones are updating the zoning bylaw, dealing with H2 zone listing criteria. Sorry about that. Maybe I'll begin again. So the site alteration bylaw is already on the work plan as a number 2 priority, along with I think 4 other items. Ahead of those, though, are the official plan and zoning bylaw updates, dealing with H2 dealing with H2 zones.
Okay, thank you. I mean, I appreciate the need to update this site alteration bylaw, and of course, we also heard from it earlier today about from the bylaw enforcement side, which I guess didn't include a review of the entire bylaw, but strictly a matter of the fees. You know, I understand the request from the Planning Advisory Committee to increase the priority, but if the priority is already at 2 and the things that are 1 are things that have to get done, I'm not sure if this direction can provide too much more criticality to the matter at hand. And again, a rhetorical question. Anybody happy to answer it?
Director Whitliff and then CEO Mayor.
Thank you. Perhaps, and I'm looking at the chair of the Planning Advisory Committee as well, but if staff starts sketching out a framework for maybe what an update, an amendment to the site alteration bylaw comprises, and present that to the Planning Advisory Committee as a discussion point, then the Planning Advisory Committee can then weigh in, and that would inform, you know, the future amendment. So I think we can get the process started. We're just, you know, not going to be able to, I think, finish that process ahead of some of those other, ahead of the rollout of some of those other items, like the official plan update. That's all.
Okay. Well, in that context, I'm fine with this.
CEO Mariotti.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor Coutier. I think I'm not sure if the Planning Advisory Committee has reviewed Mr. Whitlib's work plan as well as the Planning Advisory Committee's work plan. I think that the Planning Advisory Committee is looking at activities from a particular lens. And they may not be aware of the much broader workload that the planning department is actually undertaking. As you've seen from Mr. Whitlib's update today, there's a lot of policy update, policy implementation, getting the foundation so that we can be more efficient at managing the department. I think that I'm losing my train of thought here, but I think the site alteration bylaw was brought up in 2020, and we all know COVID. We had no planning department. It's been a year. Mr. Whitlib said earlier that our planning staff is basically a year old. Mr. Whitlib is just over. He's 7 months old. And council can see, that just the sheer amount of work that we've got going on. So there has to be an element of patience here as well, and so I ask for council's indulgence in trying to appreciate what the planning department is trying to do.
Councillor Cooper.
I guess just my view is that there is sort of an urgency on this one because we're going into high season very shortly, and this will have an impact. So that's the only reason I would encourage that we get on to that. I realize that reviewing the OP and the zoning bylaws are very high priority, but they're sort of a longer term goal, and I don't know. I'm wondering if we should not get on with this. Thank you.
Councillor Hazelton, please.
At the risk of putting my hand up again, which I do way too often, and just as some background, the Planning Advisory Committee discussed this in February and provided a variety of information. And it was the Planning Advisory Committee members who said last Friday that they thought it was of a urgent nature, reflecting what Councillor Cooper just said. So as I started off, I put my hand up way too often, but I'm going to suggest that perhaps a good path forward is for me to strike a working group, and we can come back with a hopefully mostly finished document that our planning department can review, hopefully approve, and get on the table ASAP. Because if we don't do something like that, we will have no new site alteration bylaw for consideration in the building season of 2024.
Thank you. Councillor Jordan.
Thank you. The planning committee works on direction from council. Did council give planning committee this item to address? I just don't recall.
Yes, we did.
Thank you.
Yes.
And it was dealt with in February.
Okay, thank you very much. Appreciate that.
So back to, I think the fastest path to action is a working group. And if you're okay with me continuing with a working group, I'll stick my neck out and go that path. If Derek wanted to.
Director Whitman.
Through the mayor, no, just wanted to say certainly staff would find that approach very helpful, utilizing the Planning Advisory Committee for the great resource that it is. And just wanted to add that sort of the staff dialogue would include not only planning staff, but bylaw enforcement staff as well.
All right, so if Councillor Hazelton is initiating a working group on site alteration, do we need this? Is the desire for council to approve this prioritizing necessary at this point?
I think we receive it, but we don't necessarily approve it.
Okay, so then my next question, and I know it's not listed here, but why not make the Planning Advisory Committee a working group?
It's something that has been talked about. I would like, if I may continue talk, I would like to wait until after our integrity commissioner comes and provides her education, training, etc., which is happening on May 3rd, which I think has extreme high importance. And it doesn't, me starting a working group to deal with this particular topic doesn't preclude anything changing, or so it doesn't require any changing of the Planning Advisory Committee.
Okay. Next one then is, be it resolved, the Planning Advisory Committee recommends to council to direct staff to provide a report and recommendation on the Severn Township floating accommodation bylaw for consideration by the Planning Advisory Committee.
So historically, anytime, and this may be new for Derek, but historically, anytime the Planning Advisory Committee met, there would be topics on the agenda. Planning would create a report that provided context to and ultimately direction to the Planning Advisory Committee on what the planning department wanted us to achieve. Historically, that was done in writing. Derek has been doing that verbally, but the downside of the verbal is we get it on the day of the meeting as opposed to several days in advance of the meeting, where the committee can dream about it at night and come with ideas on the day of the meeting. So the purpose of this was we had a preliminary discussion, not about the content of the Severn bylaw, but about the fact that the Planning Advisory Committee had an appetite to discuss the Severn bylaw, and then committee members asked Derek what his thoughts were and what guidance or concerns he would want us to explore. And so the purpose of this resolution was to be a formal ask of council to number one, ask Derek to write not a complex detailed report, but just a summary, providing some direction, and basically return that to us so that we could then discuss that topic with his guidance at our next meeting.
All right. So you're basically at the advisory committee is asking council to ask the advisory committee to talk about floating accommodations. Because
The advisory committee is recommending to council to direct staff to provide a report that can then be considered by the Planning Advisory Committee.
okay,
Because today we don't, in the context of the terms of the committee,
yeah,
we can't add new items to our consideration. We have to ask council to give us items, and that's really what this
Yeah.
process, ask for a report and for consideration.
CO Mariotti and then Councillor Redco.
Believe that, correct me if I'm wrong, Councillor Hazelton, but I think staff would provide reports to the Planning Advisory Committee before the Advisory Committee met monthly.
Generally, yes.
Generally, okay.
Yes.
So now that we're meeting on a regular basis, I guess is why the written reports have probably tailed off, and now it's more kind of a verbal
No.
interaction.
Historically, in all the previous years, any meeting we had of the Planning Advisory Committee, there would always be a staff report provided several days in advance of the meeting with on basically the date of the agenda publication, where we would have a staff report providing guidance on what we were talking about.
I think council can see the number of reports that planning staff is already doing. And I really have a big concern that we're going to be overloading staff like in the past has occurred, and we ended up with no people in the planning department. I think we have to really be careful here, because the Planning Advisory Committee is a very valuable resource that council asks the Planning Advisory Committee to go away and look at something, or that staff would like assistance from the Planning Advisory Committee to bring expertise. For example, like in the previous topic that we just discussed on the site preservation bylaw, it's a perfect idea. Working group, advisory committee come up with a draft so that planning staff can review, and away we go. We're flipping this over its head. We're allowing the Planning Advisory Committee now to start giving work to planning staff. And for me, as the CAO, and to protect the planning department is a big concern.
Well, and that leads directly into the third motion on this list, which says Be it resolved, the Planning Advisory Committee recommends to council that the committee of terms of reference mandate be modified to allow the Planning Advisory Committee to add agenda items for consideration without direction from council. And so I had some concern talking about item 2 as a, even though I consider it more or less a example of what's happening in item 3. But Councillor Predko, I didn't want to take away from your turn.
That's okay. You were basically going down the road that I was worried about. And I guess one of the concerns I'd have with number 2 is the lack of scope on the report. So a report that comes from planning could be a one-pager summarizing the issues around floating accommodations, but it could also be a comprehensive report like the one that Jeff provided for the rock crushing that was voluminous. And I think what we lack is this a factum report, or is it an in-depth analysis of what's going on? So that's one of the concerns I've got with that. And if the request is a one-pager, this is what Parks Canada is doing, this is what Ontario is doing, and this is what we think we should do, I don't have a particular problem with that direction. I have a concern if this is trying to second guess positions the township can take with regards to Canada Parks and et cetera. That's where I think the motion or resolution is a little bit vague for me to feel completely comfortable to say carried or I support it, because that amount of time required by the planning department is obviously hugely impacted by that. I don't know if you can comment.
Through the mayor, if it may assist council, I did take the opportunity some weeks ago when speaking with Jamie Robinson on another matter, but to pick his brain on the approach and working with the Planning Advisory Committee in the past and his experience. And what he found productive was, I think, both what Councillor Predko and Councillor Hazelton are referring to in terms of a brief report on a topic that's been the subject of direction from council. And he said he found it useful to that providing that brief report focused the Planning Advisory Committee in terms of the work that they then went away and did, as opposed to just presenting a broad question to the Planning Advisory Committee to address. So that was his approach, what Councillor Hazelton described, to provide a brief report on the subject matter directed by council to, again, focus and guide that discussion. And he found that to be a very productive way of getting the most out of the committee and getting valuable information back to staff, so then staff can then prepare a comprehensive staff report, talk about the work in consultation that includes discussion of the work in consultation that's been done with the Planning Advisory Committee, and present that to council in the form of a recommendation.
So in that regard, with a report that's the equivalent of a long email, I don't see that this causes me too much concern. I get my concern is around, I think, leading into number 3, where the Planning Advisory Committee may come up with new things that haven't been considered by the planning worksheet, and doesn't necessarily have the backing of council for that being a priority. That's what my concern would be.
Councillor Jarvis.
Yeah, I find myself in the same boat here. In the normal course of events for us as municipal council, I would assume that a question about floating cottages would be something that would be either new business would come before council or planning council, I'm not sure which, at which point we would decide how we want to handle it and possibly hand it off to the planning committee to deal with if we so choose. But it'll be something we would deal with as on either ongoing or new business at a council meeting. So why don't we address it in that context? and move it from there, in the same way that the planning committee was established and the guidelines that were provided at the time that it was established. I don't think we should be changing anything there because it's a tail wagging the dog situation. I think we want to avoid that.
It's interesting. You mentioned Mr. Robinson, who was in a room earlier today, and I thought you were going to go in a completely different direction. And that is because, to the best of my knowledge, it was Mr. Robinson who prepared the report for the Severn Township flooring accommodations. He made the recommendations on the bylaw that was eventually passed, to the best of my knowledge. And so, to me, I find what, trying to stick initially to just number 2 here, that I can appreciate the Planning Advisory Committee having an appetite to discuss this particular topic. But to me, I don't want to put, I think we as council and Director Whitlam have to decide, do we want the time spent talking on that topic? Because what I think is very interesting is that we know what Severn Township did. We know that there are certain advantages to their approach. The real question would be, in my mind, are there disadvantages to their approach? And do we want Director Whitlam? I mean, it says provide a report and recommendation. So if we want Mr. Whitlam to provide a report, the report's easy. Here's what the Township of Severn did. Go. The recommendation is not easy, because that means you have to, Director Whitlam, have to review what Severn did and suggest whether or not we should be doing something similar, which means you have to review it and think about it. And so, it's again, I think I already heard the cart before the horse, or the tail wag. I forget which expression you use. The tail wagging the dog. I'm concerned because personally, I have an appetite, and this is now personal. Personally, as an individual, I have an appetite for Director Whitlam to review the Severn report to determine whether or not we should be doing something on that sooner rather than later. I'm not sure what additional information the Planning Advisory Committee will make to that review. So I find myself hesitant because, again, I feel like in this case, well, let me be straightforward. I attended the electronically, but I attended the Planning Advisory Committee meeting of last week. The Planning Advisory Committee includes a number of, I think, very knowledgeable residents in our township as contributors to that those meetings. I absolutely appreciate their contributions. The Planning Advisory Committee also includes 3 councillors. And I found that during parts of that committee meeting, the councillors were driving the discussion more than the residents. And at that point, I'm asking myself, wait a minute here. These are councillors trying to make their points, their mandates, as opposed to the residents. And in my mind, the Planning Advisory Committee intention is to receive information from the residents, not to give certain councillors an opportunity to direct their personal vision. And so I have a concern, especially also when it comes to item 3, that we're creating a vehicle for certain councillors, 2 of whom aren't sitting in this conversation right now, only 1. And quite frankly, I think all 3 should be here as part of this conversation, but I don't want the planning advisory committee to be a vehicle for 3 councillors to have an advantage over the other 4 councillors by having a second vehicle, method, way of driving the conversation. And my recollection, and I'd have to review it to see whether it's correct, so I'm not saying this is the truth, it's just my recollection, is the topic of the floating accommodation was more driven by the councillor members of that committee than the balance of the committee. I'll call it the resident members. Councillors are residents as well, but you understand the distinction I'm making here. And so that is where, to me, I'd rather have council as a whole drive the agenda of the advisory committee, not 3 councillors drive the agenda of the advisory committee. Does that make sense? And that's my concern with items 2 and 3 on this list, is I feel like we are especially item 3, we are giving additional powers to 3 councillors over the other 4. And I don't think that's fair to anyone. Hence, I'm not keen on those 2 items. Councillor Hazelton.
Yeah, I respectfully disagree with your assessment. When we brought this up, the members, all members expressed an interest in talking about floating homes. And the request of Derek was, and again, we have to be careful, you know, the words report and recommendation, yes, they're formal words, but that was not the expectation expressed by the members of the Planning Advisory Committee. It was, they already asked Derek, did you read the draft bylaw? Derek said yes. And they were essentially saying, fine, what areas of the bylaw would you like us to focus on so that we can add perhaps some clarity and value to the process? And so a report, a report can be like, as Councillor Predko said, it can be a long email, it can be a short email, whatever recommendation is, look at this point, this point, and this point, fine. So it was not a significant expectation of staff. So as far as I'm concerned, that should be a no-brainer. We should be saying, okay, everybody on the Planning Advisory Committee wanted to do it. The councillors and every other member expressed strong interest. And so I think, as far as I'm concerned, we should just approve that and get on with it. But before we get on to the 3rd item, I wanted to highlight something, and this is a little bit to educate our CAO and back to Derek's chat with Jamie. Any topic that the planning department wants the Planning Advisory Committee to look at and offer comment needs to have guidance and direction on what you want to get out of it. And so pick any other topic of substance on our list of assigned activities. You're going to have to write a report. Jamie had to write reports. I'm sorry, in the workload concept, if you want value from the Planning Advisory Committee, sadly, it's going to require some prep work from you so that you tell basically the Planning Advisory Committee where you want them to bring value to you. And without that balance, then, at the Planning Advisory Committee, in theory, we could talk about anything. And number 3 was all about, hey, if you want to talk about something that isn't on the list, don't expect anybody from planning to write a report or even guidance. But if you want to talk about it, talk about it. But don't have an arbitrary process and procedure that says, oh, we didn't put it on the agenda. That means we can't even talk about it. Oh, it wasn't assigned to us, but we can't talk about it. But maybe somebody in their planning expertise has a belief that this topic, call it widget 1, is something that we should be considering. And maybe somebody on the planning advisory committee would like to say, hey, I think we should talk about this. Let us engage in a conversation about it, and then ultimately punt it up to council to say, is this important for future considerations? Because if we deal with the current process, it's really time warped and extremely structured. And I would say that one of the huge frustrations that some of the senior members of the Planning Advisory Committee have shared with me and others is that if we don't figure out how to change it, they're just not going to show up anymore. It's like, don't waste my time. You know, I want to contribute, but these formalities are resulting in me feeling like I'm wasting my time. You know, we only had 3 people, me as one of them, show up here for the Planning Advisory Committee. Everybody else said it's not worth my time to come and talk about those topics. We ended up talking for the entire 2 hours about those 2 topics and a couple other minor ones, but their initial decision was it is not worth my time to travel to the township to talk about those topics. So back to the earlier, somebody said, well, create a working group. Okay, well, I am going to try the working group process. But if we don't make big changes in the Planning Advisory Committee, we might as well just nuke it because nobody's going to show up. The frustrations are way too high.
Sorry, I'm hoping this isn't going to muddy the water. I'm just going to speak from experience with committees and what I've witnessed here. To kind of both pieces. The procedural bylaw went through a review last year. It's already been updated twice this year. As staff, it's a little frustrating to see another recommendation come forward for an amendment when something doesn't work a particular way, then there's a change ask. And this is another workload piece that every month, if there's an update, then that's another piece of work that gets added that wasn't anticipated. And all of those little things take away from time to be able to do staff reports for things like a planning committee. Most committees in municipalities do not have the workload that is being expected of, especially the Planning Advisory Committee at this point in time. All of those items are valuable that are being brought forward 100%. All of those things are worth being discussed, are in need of being updated. I'm not talking about the specific topics, but about the workload themselves. You know, CEO Mariotti was correct when he said earlier that staff reports were being produced, but that was when the committee was not meeting as frequently, because there isn't necessarily the turnaround time. If every meeting such large topics come out as recommendations for staff, it is going to be impossible for staff to make all of those things a priority and do them justice and be able to provide that information back. So I think part of this, there needs to be a balance between the expectation of the workload that the committee wants to have and what is reasonable with the staffing resources we have. If the committee and council wants us to do 5 things more every month, then we need more staff in order to produce those things. Or there needs to be a reasonable expectation of what is a priority versus, review the OP or site plan alteration. Where's that priority? I'm just picking those 2 things because those are 2 things that came out today, but I'm not saying one is better than the other. But this is making it very difficult for all of us to be able to keep up with those workloads, right? So if you want us to move forward, then maybe the PAC needs to meet every other month versus every month. Or, as I had suggested back in August when we reviewed the committee terms of reference and implemented the working groups, That was a direction from council to have the working groups. No one has brought forward a request for working groups since then. But we did have a whole discussion back in August about all of our committees and which ones could be working groups or not working groups. A lot of the concerns that have been brought forward about being able to, discuss things on the fly, being able to make recommendations, being able to bring forward different items, and the concerns about the structure of the committee would be negated with a working group. However, if you're looking for input from the district or the province, those people may not feel comfortable coming to the table with a working group. And that's when you have the formality of committees and the direction of council coming into play to benefit those pieces, right? So you need to figure out as a whole collectively, and it's unfortunate that we're short a few members right now, but where's the pros and cons to balance out the committee versus the working group, and what the expectation is of staff and those committees in order to bring forward recommendations that are fruitful to council to make informed decisions.
From 10,000. I'll try and be brief. From 10,000 feet, I see council is the ultimate authority on how things get directed within this municipality. So if somebody has a concern, they need to bring it to council, and then council takes it from there. If it's a concern with regards to planning, then planning council takes it from there. So I don't understand how we got things coming up from a committee level when we should be directing it down to committee level. So I don't agree with the way things, the direction thing that's being suggested here. So it comes from council or planning council to the lower committee level to be dealt with, or through, I suppose, through COW as well. However, I sense a high level of frustration with regards to floating cottages, and I fully understand. If there is something coming up to council in the near future on floating cottages, I'd love to hear that's the case. But government by definition is not necessarily nimble, and unless there's a real big emergency on hand. I think just based on the way we're supposed to operate, that's the way it is. I don't see us taking direction from a committee. We give direction to a committee. Enough said.
Thank you. Councillor Cooper.
Thank you. And I would just say that I think an hour ago, our mayor said that maybe our planning committee should be a working group. Yeah, probably should, and sooner the better. And as far as top down from the council thinking, I'm sorry, Councillor Jarvis, I don't agree with that kind of thinking. I think council gives direction, but should really take direction to a certain extent from learned people that know what they're talking about. So I'm sorry, that's why we need working groups and advisory groups to help us get to a better place. So thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Predko.
Thank you, and through you, your worship. At the risk of starting to have this conversation sound redundant, I'll try to be quick. I view council gives direction as the structure exists today. Council gives instructions with a list of topics for discussion and agenda items for the Planning Advisory Council. And those topics are items that council has deemed to be of importance and priority, and of which we've probably already received reports and are quite knowledgeable about the issues, just not the solutions. I think if we are allowing the committee to suddenly come up with agenda items for which they have a resolution that becomes part of the council decision on the consent agenda, I think we lack some of the oversight and background knowledge, because the councillors who aren't on that committee don't have all of the necessary background and information to make the same committed decision as the people that were on that committee. So I understand the people on the committee are learned and respected in the community, but I think council is still the one that is on the hook for making these decisions. So I am very concerned that we would be losing some of the controls that have traditionally been in place for council making decisions.
Thank you. Shortly. I would like to have a chance to speak because I do get to speak in each round. So, I mean, when I'm looking at item 2, I would have been much more comfortable if the motion had read something to the effect of council directs staff to provide questions on Severn Township floating accommodation bylaw. Because then what we're doing, they're asking council to direct the advisory committee to look into it. And I think that's a significant difference from asking for a report and recommendation from staff. Also, the third one I have real difficulty with because, again, it's basically the Planning Advisory Committee is asking for the ability to set their agenda effectively. That's in effect what it's saying, that they want the ability to set the agenda. And I heard very clearly the frustration of some of the Planning Advisory Committee members with whether the discussions on Friday were worth their time or not. I heard that very clearly. But I think, to me, I think of two things. One is yes, I believe the Planning Advisory Committee would be more effective as a working group because that would give them the flexibility to make recommendations to be considered. I also think that their meetings should be scheduled at least a week earlier each month than they are now, or 2 weeks earlier, so that they don't have to wait 5 weeks for things to come in front of council. If they have something they want to provide to council, it'd be nice if council got it the same term, the same at the next council meeting versus the next council meeting plus one. Now I have a long-winded motion here. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So basically, be it resolved that council adopts the April 5th, 2024 Planning Advisory Committee resolutions. And there's 3 of them. And the first one we've already stroked out instead of a working group. I don't know if council has an appetite to vote on the other 2 or to vote each one separately or to reword any of them. Okay, what I'm going to do then is on the 3 resolutions that Planning Advisory Committee brought forth, my understanding is the first one has been in effect withdrawn and being replaced by a working group. Is that correct, Councillor Hazelton?
Just frame it as it's been received.
Okay. I'm going to read each one separately because I think that'll be the most practical way of doing this, and we'll take the vote. And so the first one is, now therefore be it resolved that council adopts the Planning Advisory Committee resolution that the Planning Advisory Committee recommends to council direct staff to prioritize a comprehensive amendment to the site alteration bylaw. All those in favor? Sir. Yes, certainly. Now be it resolved that council adopts the April 5th, 2024 Planning Advisory Committee resolution that the Planning Advisory Committee recommends to council to direct staff to prioritize a comprehensive amendment to the site alteration bylaw. All those in favor? Okay, that one is then carried. The second one would be it resolved that council adopts the April 5th, 2024 Planning Advisory Committee resolution that the Planning Advisory Committee recommends to council to direct staff to provide a report and recommendation on the Severn Township floating accommodation bylaw. All those in favor? 1, 2. Right now, I'm only seeing 2 in favor, so that is defeated. I did not see his hand raised. And the third motion, be it resolved that council adopts the April 5th, 2024 Planning Advisory Committee resolution that the Planning Advisory Committee recommends to council that the committee terms of reference mandate be modified to allow the Planning Advisory Committee to add agenda items for consideration without direction from council, planning council, or committee of the whole. And that Schedule H, Section 2B of the procedure bylaw be amended to allow the Planning Advisory Committee to be able to add new business items during the meeting. All those in favor? I see 2 in favor, 3 against. That is defeated. All right. Does that kind of make sense to you? Okay. All right. So now we have a bylaw regarding to the road naming of those roads, Life's Way and Lyric Lane. We had a report on that earlier, or like last month. So I have moved by Councillor Hazelton, seconded by Councillor Cooper. Be it resolved that Planning Council enact bylaw 2024-035, road naming for Life's Way and Lyric Lane. All those in favor? And that is carried. Neither of these people are here. Moved by Councillor Predko, seconded by Councillor Cooper. Be it resolved that Planning Council adopts bylaw 2024-036 to confirm the proceedings of the April 9, 2024 council meeting. All those in favor? And that is carried. Thank you. Moved by Councillor Hazelton, seconded by Councillor Jarvis. Be it resolved that Planning Council is now adjourned at 5:42 p.m. until May 14th, 2024 at 9 a.m. or at the call of the chair. All those in favor? And we are now